The dead stars had no names. That was the point, Carver always said. Names implied significance, and significance implied someone cared enough to look. Out here, past the Vethian scatter, past the last blinking relay buoy that marked the edge of the Concorde's administrative interest, nobody looked. The stars burned out quietly, collapsed into themselves, and became cold, dark things drifting in the nothing. No obituary. No monument. Just silence and mathematics. Carver found them beautiful. He was sitting at his cartography console, a wide curved desk covered in holographic overlays, stellar density charts, and 3 empty cups of something the ship's fabricator called coffee, but which tasted more like warm pencil shavings. The Pale Meridian was a research vessel, technically the property of the Velhari Institute of Cosmological Studies. Practically the property of whoever happened to be living aboard her for months at a stretch with no supervision and questionable hygiene habits. That was Carver. His full name was Davin Carver, though most people who had known him before this chapter of his life didn't use names. They used call signs. He didn't think about that. He preferred not to. He was lean in the way that long-haul spacers got lean, not muscular, not wasted, just efficient, like a body that had quietly negotiated a treaty with hardship and settled on the minimum viable version of itself. His hair was dark, threaded through with premature silver at the sides. His hands were the most expressive thing about him. They moved constantly, tapping, adjusting, rotating holographic star clusters with a kind of absent tenderness, the way another man might absently pet a dog. "You're humming again," said a voice from the doorway. Carver stopped. He hadn't realized he was. Lyra 9 stepped into the cartography bay with the particular floating quality that all Velhari had. Their legs built for lower gravity than most stations were calibrated for, so they always seemed to be moving slightly faster than the floor warranted. She was young by her species measure, somewhere between adolescence and full maturity, which manifested physically as a kind of unfinished luminescence. The bioluminescent tracery beneath her pale skin glowed in shifting patterns, currently a mild, irritated amber, which Carver had learned to read as the color of someone who had been kept waiting. She was carrying a data slate in 2 of her 4 hands. The other 2 were tucked behind her back in the Velhari, posture that indicated she wanted something and was trying not to. Looked like she wanted it. Carver had learned to read that too. "You finished the orbital decay projections?" he asked without turning around. "I finished them 2 hours ago," Lyra 9 said, setting the slate on the console beside him. "While you were humming at a star that has been dead for 40,000 years and cannot hear you. Everything can hear you if you hum loud enough. That is not science." "No," Carver agreed. "It's something better." She made the sound that served Velhari as a sigh, a soft resonant click in the back of the throat. She pulled up a stool and sat beside him with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had long since stopped pretending this was a formal working arrangement. 6 months aboard a ship with only 2 occupants had a way of dissolving professional distance into something more honest. She peered at his current mapping overlay, her secondary eyelids flickering, with the faint iridescence that meant she was concentrating. "You've plotted the Charis cluster wrong again," she said. "I haven't. The 4th body is 2 degrees off the central plane." "The 4th body was 2 degrees off the central plane," Carver said. 400 years ago. It's migrated. Nobody's updated the charts because nobody's been out here to check." He zoomed in with 2 fingers, pulling the overlay close. "That's what we're here for." Correcting the record, Lyra 9 studied the data quietly. Her luminescence shifted, the amber cooling toward a pale, interested blue that Carver privately thought of as her learning color, though he had never said so aloud because she would have found it embarrassingly sentimental. "My faculty advisor told me this posting would be dull," she said. "Is it?" She considered this with the grave seriousness she applied to most things. "No," she admitted. "But I'm still not sure why a human cartographer is better at Velhari stellar mapping than anyone the Institute employs." Carver picked up one of the empty coffee cups, looked into it as if hoping it had refilled itself, and set it back down. "Because I have no career to protect," he said. "I'll correct charts that contradict the published consensus. Institute academics don't. Bad for grant applications. This seemed to satisfy her. She went back to the data slate, and they worked in the particular comfortable silence that people fall into when they have been in close quarters long enough that silence no longer needs to be filled. Outside the broad observation port, the dead star they had been cataloging, for the past 3 days was a dim smudged, nothing against the black, a white dwarf barely distinguishable. From the background radiation, Carver was still looking at it when the proximity alarm went off, not the slow, bureaucratic ping of a mapped vessel entering range. This was the sharp, stuttering shriek of an emergency collision protocol, something arriving fast, something that had come out of a micro-jump dangerously close, something that did not want to be seen until it was too close to run from. Carver was on his feet before the second pulse sounded, not because he thought quickly, because his body moved first and his mind caught up a half-second later, and he was already at the navigation overlay, already pulling up the external sensor feed with both hands. And the thought that arrived with that automatic motion was, this is not the first time someone has come at me fast and quiet. He didn't know where that thought came from. He didn't have time to examine it. Carver. Lyra 9's luminescence had gone a sharp, "Urgent white, I see it," he said. The ship on the external feed was not a research vessel. It was a Shade-class intercept cutter, all angles and dull radar-absorbing plating, the kind of ship that had no legitimate commercial or academic purpose whatsoever. It was the kind of ship that existed to be somewhere it wasn't supposed to be and do something that wasn't supposed to be done. 3 more signatures bloomed on the sensor overlay. They had come in from multiple vectors. They'd been positioned before the jump. This was not opportunistic. This was planned. "Get to the inner compartment," Carver said. His voice had changed. He noticed it the way you notice a change in air pressure. Not dramatic, just different. Flatter. Quieter. "What's happening?" Lyra 9 was standing, her data slate fallen to the floor, her 4 hands drawn in against her body in the Velhari posture of acute alarm. "Who are they?" "Go," Carver said. "Lock the interior bulkhead. Don't open it for anyone." "Carver," he looked at her. Just for a second. Something in his face made her stop arguing. She turned and ran. He turned back to the console and started running countermeasures he hadn't known he remembered. His fingers moved across the overlay with a precision that had nothing to do with cartography. The first magnetic grapple struck the pale Meridian's hull at exactly the moment Carver had calculated it would. The second and third followed within 4 seconds. The ship shuddered, groaning in the particular stressed metal way that meant it was being pulled against its will. He heard the cutting torches begin against the starboard airlock. 20 seconds. Maybe 30. He looked at his hands on the console. "Who taught you that?" he thought. Then the breach charge went off, and the world turned inside out. The concussive wave hit him like a wall. Not the blast. The ship's emergency bulkheads had absorbed most of it. But the pressure displacement, the sudden violent atmospheric surge that picked him up and put him down again 3 meters away. Against the far wall, his head connecting with a structural rib with a sound like a bat hitting something soft, slid to the floor, the last thing he registered. Before the dark took him was the smell of breach gel and something metallic, and voices, human voices, which was wrong, which was the wrongest thing about all of this, human voices. He filed that thought, carefully in the last lit corner of his consciousness. Then, the dark took him completely. He woke to the sound of Lyra 9. Screaming, not panicked. Screaming, fury. The resonant harmonic shriek that Velhari produced at maximum emotional output. A sound that vibrated in the bones of the ship itself. He heard it through the bulkhead, through the ringing wreckage of his own skull, and it was the thing that pulled him up out of the dark, the way a rope pulls someone up out of deep water. He was on his side. The cartography bay was wrecked. Holographic overlays dead, consoles sparking. The observation port cracked in a dendritic web but not breached. The stellar overlay had collapsed into a single strobing error message. His right hand was outstretched, palm down on the cold deck, and when he tried to move it, he found that it had already found the edge of the console above him and was gripping it and was pulling him upright. His body was very much ahead of his mind. He got to his feet. His head screamed. He touched the side of his skull. His fingers came back bloody, but not catastrophically so. He'd been hit worse. He knew this without knowing how he knew it. "Lyra," he said. His voice was a ruin. He cleared it and said it again, louder. The screaming stopped. The silence was worse. He heard bootsteps, multiple sets, moving toward the starboard egress. Moving away from him. Moving with the particular purposeful rhythm of people who had what they came for and were leaving. He heard a voice, male, flat, professionally dispassionate. "Package is secured. Bloodline signature confirmed. Execute withdrawal." Package. Carver stood very still in the center of the wrecked cartography bay. Something behind his eyes went very, very quiet. He looked down at his hands. His hands, he noticed with a distant kind of clarity, had already found the emergency tool locker beneath the secondary console and were pulling it open. His hands had already identified the plasma cutter, the breech bar, the length of conductive cable, and were already sorting through them with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what they were building. "Who are you?" he thought to his own hands. His hands didn't answer. They just kept working. Outside the observation port, the dead star offered no illumination whatsoever. That was fine. Carver didn't need light to see where he was going. He needed to follow the sound of bootsteps. And his hands, it turned out, knew exactly how to do that. The corridor was dark. Not the comfortable dark of powered-down ship systems on a scheduled cycle. The absolute, pressure-sealed dark of a vessel whose main power trunk had been deliberately cut. The Shroud Collective, whoever they were, knew how to blind a ship before they boarded it. Kill the lights, kill the artificial gravity regulators, kill the emergency beacon array, strand the vessel, take what you came for, leave, clean, professional, well-funded. Carver moved through the dark without a light source. This was not bravery. It was the result of a simple calculation his body had made before his conscious mind had caught up. A light source makes you visible, and being visible in a compromised corridor is how you die. He didn't know who had made that calculation first, or when, or under what circumstances. The memory wasn't there, just the lesson, burned in below the level of language, installed at some point in his past like firmware in a machine. His right hand trailed the wall, his left held the breech bar. His feet moved in a low, rolling step that distributed his weight carefully, minimizing sound on the deck grating. The artificial gravity was fluctuating, another system the shroud had partially disrupted, so every fourth or fifth step his stomach lurched as his body briefly weighed 30% less. He compensated automatically, shifting his center of gravity, never breaking the rhythm. He reached the junction where the research corridor met the ship's service spine and stopped. He pressed himself into the alcove beside the junction and listened. Voices. 2 of them. Close. "Don't understand why they needed the whole package," one was saying. Low, male, the particular flat vowels of the outer colony belts. Bloodline extract would have been simpler, less exposure. "Price differential," said the other. "Liv Velhari females of the royal subcaste get 3 times the market rate. Something about the living bioluminescent tissue, medical applications." A pause. "Or collector applications. Depends on the buyer." Carver stood very still in the alcove. Something moved through him. Not rage. Rage was hot and messy and made you loud. This was colder than that. More patient. It settled into his chest like ballast, like weight added to the keel of a ship to make it more stable in bad water. He looked down at his hands in the dark. On the inside of his left forearm he had a tattoo. He'd had it so long he rarely thought about it, just a row of geometric marks in dark ink, the kind of pattern that spacers sometimes got purely for aesthetics. He couldn't see it now in the dark, but he knew it was there. And something about the conversation he had just heard made him think about it differently. Those weren't aesthetic marks. That was a unit identifier. Ghost actual. He didn't know what that meant. The memory was gone, scraped out by whatever the breach charge had carried. Some kind of neural disruption compound aerosolized in the blast. he suspected now, thinking back to the particular quality of the blackout, the way it hadn't felt like simple concussion. Targeted amnesia. Someone had wanted him not just unconscious but emptied. Leave the body, erase the contents. They had not understood what they were leaving. Carver moved out of the alcove. What followed was not graceful. It was not the choreographed efficiency of a hollow film action sequence. It was approximately 4 seconds of very ugly close-quarters work in a dark corridor, the kind that made sounds that Carver's conscious mind did not enjoy cataloging, and when it was over, both men were on the floor and Carver was breathing harder than he'd like, and had acquired a kinetic sidearm and a utility knife, and a keycard clipped to the belt of the larger of the two men. He also had a bruised rib where an elbow had connected. He acknowledged the rib. He set the acknowledgement aside. He moved on. The pale meridian had 4 docking points. The shroud cutter would have connected to the primary starboard lock. That was standard intercept doctrine. He knew this the way he knew the breech bar weighed 2.3 kilograms, empirically and without ceremony. They would have a holding area aboard their vessel. They wouldn't transfer the package to a secondary ship until they were at the processing station. Too much exposure in open space, which meant Lyra 9 was still aboard the cutter, which meant the cutter was still magnetically grappled to the pale meridian, which meant he had a window. He found the starboard airlock by following the faint emergency phosphorescent strip along the base of the corridor wall. The keycard from the larger man's belt opened the manual override panel beside the lock. Carver punched in what he suspected was the release sequence. His fingers moved with a confidence his brain could not justify. The panel accepted it. The airlock cycled. Carver stepped through. The Shade-class cutter was smaller than it looked from the outside. The internal layout was strictly utilitarian, no aesthetic consideration whatsoever, just function pressed into the minimum viable volume. Weapons rack beside the airlock, navigation cluster forward, a 4-bunk crew rest area amidships, and at the rear, separated from the crew quarters by a reinforced bulkhead with a single viewport, a holding compartment. Carver knew this layout. He did not know how he knew it. He moved through the cutter the way water moves through a pipe, following the path of least resistance, going where the space allowed, making no unnecessary decisions. He stepped over the first crew member he found, asleep in the rest area, still suited, exhausted from the operation, with the careful precision of a man crossing a minefield, and kept moving. 2 more at the navigation cluster, focused on the console. He could hear them arguing quietly about the jump coordinates for the processing station. He marked their positions. He kept moving. The holding compartment lock was a 3-point magnetic seal, the keycard, a biometric reader, and a manual deadbolt. He had the keycard. He was not the registered biometric. He had the breech bar. He used the breech bar on the biometric reader with one sharp leverage strike that destroyed the reader and triggered the magnetic seal's failsafe, which, in Shade-class vessels, he knew this, defaulted to open on biometric failure rather than locked, because the designers had considered crew lockout scenarios a higher risk than prisoner escape scenarios. The deadbolt he simply shot off. The door opened. Lyra 9 was inside, sitting against the far wall with her knees drawn up and her forearms wrapped around herself. Her bioluminescence was almost entirely extinguished, just a faint, frightened pulse at her temples and collarbones, the Velhari equivalent of someone curled up in the dark trying to be very small. She looked up when the door opened. Her luminescence came back in one sudden flooding rush, a blazing white like a star igniting. "Carver," she said. Her voice was wrecked, the layered harmonics compressed into something small and ragged. She was on her feet. "Carver, how—" "We're leaving," he said. "Stay close. Don't make sound." "There are 5 of them." "4," he said. "Stay close." She crossed the compartment and he noted, with the detached portion of his mind that seemed to be running the whole operation, that she did not ask more questions. She tucked herself in behind his left shoulder and he felt her hand grip the back of his jacket with two of her 4 hands, and he felt the faint warmth of her bioluminescence against the back of his neck, and it reminded him, for reasons he could not access, of something important that he couldn't name. They moved. The two at the navigation cluster became a problem, and then immediately stopped being a problem. The one asleep in the rest area slept through the entire event, which was either fortunate or disappointing depending on your disposition, and Carver had no disposition about it either way. That left the commander. He was waiting at the airlock. He was a big man, not as big as the one called Boyd in the story Carver didn't know he was echoing, but big in the way of men who had been professionally dangerous for a long time and had survived by being slightly more careful than everyone they'd encountered. He had a sidearm up and leveled. He had positioned himself with his back to the hull so he couldn't be flanked. He had done everything correctly. "Hands," he said. Carver stopped. He looked at the commander. He looked at the weapon. He performed in the space of approximately 1 second, a calculation he could not have verbalized, but which his body understood completely. Angles, distances, the commander's trigger discipline, the position of Lyra 9 behind his left shoulder. "You took her bloodline signature," Carver said. His voice was very calm. "You already have what the buyer needs medically. You could let her go." "She's worth more alive," the commander said. "She's also not a package," Carver said. "She's a 20-year-old student who was mapping dead stars and writing orbital decay projections and didn't deserve any part of this." The commander's aim didn't waver. "Neither did I, probably," he said. "And here we both are." "Here we both are," Carver agreed. His left hand, he realized, was holding the kinetic sidearm he'd taken from the corridor. He didn't remember raising it. The commander clocked it at the same moment. What followed was very brief and very loud in the confined space of the airlock corridor. Carver was already moving when the commander fired, dropping, rolling left, the shot passing through the space where his center mass had been. His return shot was single, placed with the calm precision of someone who was not thinking about it at all, and it took the commander in the shoulder of his weapon arm, with a result that was medical rather than fatal. The commander sat down against the hull and used his remaining operational hand to apply pressure, and said nothing further. Carver stood over him for a moment. "There's a medkit in the crew rest area," he said. "Third locker on the left." The commander stared at him. "Who are you?" Carver looked at his hands, the tattoo on his left forearm, ghost actual, the knowledge in his fingers, in his feet, in the leveraged geometry of how he moved through spaces that wanted to stop him. The rusted door in the back of his mind, opening slowly, reluctantly, things emerging from behind it that he was not entirely ready to welcome back. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. He lowered the weapon. He turned to Lyra 9, who was standing in the corridor entrance behind him, her luminescence a complex, shifting pattern he had never seen on her before. Not amber or blue or white, but something in between. Something that in humans might have been called complicated. "Are you injured?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Her secondary eyelids flickered. "No," she said quietly. "Are you?" He considered the question more carefully than she probably intended it. "I don't know," he said. "Not physically." She was quiet. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing their words, with the same attention she gave orbital decay projections, "Carver, when I was in that compartment I kept thinking, you are a cartographer. You map dead things. You were going to just find me, like a coordinate." "Yes," he said. "You found me like you had done it before." He looked at the airlock. Beyond it, through the connected corridor, was the pale meridian, his charts, his 3 cups of cold fake coffee, his dead stars with no names. "Maybe I have," he said. She tilted her head, the Velhari gesture that meant, "I am waiting, and I have patience, but not infinite patience." Carver looked down at the tattoo on his left forearm, the geometric marks of ghost actual, his fingers tracing them without his permission, The way they had moved through the dark corridor, the way they had known the shade class layout, the way they had done what was needed without consultation. "When we get back," he said slowly, "I think I need to make some inquiries." "About what?" He looked up at her. "About who I was," he said, "before the stars." Lyra 9's luminescence settled, slowly, deliberately, into the pale, steady blue of her learning color. "Then I will help you," she said simply. "That is what I am here for." Carver almost smiled. "I thought you were here for orbital decay projections." "Those too," she said. They walked back through the airlock together, back through the quiet, damaged corridors of the pale meridian, back toward the cartography bay where the broken stellar overlay still strobed its single patient error message. Outside the cracked observation port, the dead star waited. Carver sat down at his console. His hands, after a moment, began to work.